Okay. So first I have an announcement to make that this session is going to be our last session based on the book, because next week, I propose to summarize whatever we have learned in the last 7 weeks, the essence of it, in my own words, and leave a lot of time for your questions. You can ask questions based on any of the sessions that we have had, not necessarily only the last session. Donna, you can make that clear also to participants who join later.
Yeah, we'll send out an announcement.
Or by announcement. Yeah, thank you. So today I wish to start with the 3 small short pieces first, and then we will discuss the chapter on the meaning of life. One short piece says freedom is order. And Krishna ji makes it clear that imposed discipline is not really discipline. The real meaning of discipline, true meaning of discipline, is learning. As we say, philosophy is a discipline. Physics is a discipline. So even in academics, we have 2 meanings for the word discipline. Krishnaji, of course, is referring here to learning as self-knowledge, which ends the illusions in our mind and thereby brings order into consciousness. And he says that order is real freedom. So we need to understand this. Take a simple example of the traffic on the road. If we were all orderly, you don't need a policeman to enforce the traffic regulations. So freedom also has limits, but those limits come from our understanding of what freedom is and when it turns into license. There is a beautiful simile given by an Indian poet, Rabindranath Tagore, who got the Nobel Prize long ago. He says, the waters of the river must be free in order to flow. But if they don't respect the banks, they will never get to the sea. So understanding freedom includes understanding the limits of freedom. And that is order. And that is also freedom, because then you're free. You don't have to choose. So that's another thing which Krishnaji points out, that we often think that freedom is freedom to choose. But there is nothing to choose for a mind that is clear, because it sees clearly what is the right way to go. And that's the only way it can go. So there is no need for choice. Choice is there only when the mind is confused and deciding whether to do this or to do that. And in deciding that, it is evaluating what it will gain or lose if it chooses one path, and what it will gain or lose if it chooses the other path. And then, based on self-interest, it decides that which is more in its self-interest. So he says, only a confused mind chooses. And that confusion coming because of the self-interest operating behind. Otherwise, the mind is more interested in finding out what is the right thing to do. And the right thing to do is what is right for the whole, not just for you. So it's not based on self-interest, but the interest of everybody who is concerned with that decision. So it's a more holistic way of looking at life and taking decisions rather than based on only self-interest. So these are the first two things he points out, that true discipline is order, and a clear mind has no temptation. Temptation means you want to do something and at the same time you are afraid of doing it. So there is a conflict between what you want and what you think you should be doing. And that's not a religious life, that is not freedom, because you are trapped in conflict. And so it's pointing out when you face temptation, it's not enough to just suppress temptation, but also to ask oneself why there was temptation. What was the cause inside from which temptation arises? To take a rather mundane example, you meet a person of the opposite sex and it arouses sexual desire in you. That's part of nature. Whether it should be fulfilled or not depends on the circumstances. If she is or he is a married person or doesn't want to engage in sex, you just let go. So there is no insistence that your desire must be fulfilled. And if the other person wishes it, and you have no objection either, you're willing to engage in sexual pleasure. In that case, there is no problem. There is no conflict. So that is freedom. It's not that a person who is realized does not have desires, but desire is not a problem for that person because he knows exactly, he or she knows exactly how to deal with desire. So it doesn't turn into a problem. That's part of intelligence, which is in wisdom. To say that there should be no desire is false. To say that one should pursue the desire is also false. The truth is that you have to understand pleasure and desire and put them in their right place. That is order. And that is also true meaning of discipline when you look at it as learning, which is self-knowledge. So discipline is learning, it is not conformity. In the army or in the police force, it is treated as conformity. In many schools where children are forced to stand in a line or behave in a particular way, otherwise they are threatened by punishment. Discipline is enforced discipline, and that is not true discipline. So it has connotations also in education. If you want the children to grow up with true discipline, you don't use fear and punishment to bring that external order about, which means you have a bigger definition for order. It includes not only the external order, but the inner order. And when there is fear, the inner order is destroyed. So to look at it more holistically, we want order both in the inner world and in the outer world. And that requires a lot of understanding. That is wisdom. So order without compulsion. Now, conscience has been given a very high meaning in many religions. But it's also a kind of control. Through telling a person what is right and what is wrong, you create a conscience in him. He feels guilty if he does what is considered wrong, and he feels proud if he does what is considered right. And that's considered to be conscience. But if you look at it in detail, conscience is like an inner policeman sitting inside you, controlling you, not allowing you to do something. So it destroys. Such is also an imposition. The inner conscience is also an imposition. It destroys freedom, it destroys love. So it goes very deep, and one has to discover that state for oneself by coming upon wisdom. This whole quest for truth is a quest for wisdom. And wisdom is to put everything in its right place. So Krishna says to be desireless is also disorder. And to pursue desire is also disorder. Understanding desire and pleasure is order. Without love, established order is anarchy. We have seen that in Russia. Russia created external order through fear. I'm talking of communist Russia. I was there in 1964 for the first time at the age of 26. And I was very impressed that I went into a bus and there was no conductor. There was only the driver. And yet every passenger purchased the ticket. So I felt very impressed that these people are so orderly, so caring, so honest, that not a single person is tried to cheat. And so I went back and told my host that I am very impressed with the public here. He said, he smiled and he said, you have no idea what it is due to. The person sitting next to you could be a white clothes policeman. And if he reports that you cheated, you could find yourself in Siberia. So there was tremendous fear behind that discipline. And that fear is an inner disorder. So real order is freedom. It includes the external order and the inner order. Inner order means no fear, no conflict. That's the state which is a religious state of a religious mind. And that's the truth one has to come upon. So perception is real action. Because without perceiving the right place and freeing yourself from all these illusions of images and so on, you don't come into them. You are using your will to act in a particular way, conforming with a certain ideal formulated either by your religion or by your own mind or by your ideology, which means there is a conflict going on between what you are and what you think you should be. And that's not a religious life. So what Krishnamurti is pointing out as freedom, as order, is very subtle. And one needs to understand that. And for that, one needs to pay a lot of attention with a mind which is inquisitive, inquiring, learning from experience for oneself, and freeing oneself of all illusion and all images. So that's the chapter on freedom is order. The next small piece is about relationship. And he talks about our relationship with nature. And he says, if you have no relationship with nature, you will have no relationship with humanity. Sounds like a very drastic statement. In another book I read that he said, if you have no relationship with that tree on the distant hill, then you will have no relationship with mankind. What is the implication of that? That tree, distant tree on a hill, doesn't give you anything, not even the fruit. And therefore, if you don't have a relationship with it, it means you have a relationship only where you have some gain, some return which you can get. And even in human relationships, we are like that. It's often a relationship of mutual gratification. You fulfill me, my needs, and I fulfill your needs. And therefore I value you, and you value me. And so long as this goes on, the self-interest of both individuals coincides, and they have what we call a ball. But sooner or later, this breaks down because the self-interest of one person becomes different from the self-interest of another. And then there is conflict. Then there is a desire to dominate, and so there is violence. And eventually, you find that these people who were deeply in love are now at the point of divorce. So to understand this whole thing, you have to understand that so long as you are acting out of self-interest, which is the ego, you are giving tremendous importance to the first person singular. The other person only incidentally, because to the extent that person fulfills your needs. And this is like a contract. And a contract relationship is not a relationship of love. It's a relationship of mutual gratification. And it breaks down when any one party does not fulfill its terms of contract. And we have in society brought marriage to that point, that it is now treated as a contract. So it's not a relationship of love. almost one is accepting defeat at the very start of that relationship and drawing up a contract that if we separate, I will pay you so much and you will pay me so much and so on. What is called the prenuptial contract. All this has nothing to do with love. Love is like true friendship, where the joy is that of sharing. So if you are in love with a woman or a man and you live with that person, you share your life, your sorrows, your joys, your children, your bed with that person. You can do it with a motive, or you can do it for no motive, just for the joy of sharing, which is true friendship. So is the marriage a true friendship or is it a contract? One has to ask oneself and be honest in this inquiry and learn from it. Because so long as self-interest is dominant factor, the relationship is very vulnerable. It continues only so long as both partners have a common self-interest. The same is true of cooperating in an institution with friends or with colleagues in any activity. One has to cooperate with a number of friends. But normally we cooperate when we agree. And the cooperation breaks down when we disagree with each other. Even between brothers, between husband and wife, that holds. Between friends, that holds. That's not true friendship. When true friendship demands agreement, it's not a relationship of love. It's a relationship based on common self-interest and demands, like a contract. So one has to discover the state of love. And Krishna says, love is where the self is not. The love of country is different from patriotism. Love of country means you feel the joy or the empathy with the river, with the trees, with the mountains in a particular country, because you have grown up with it. They are your colleagues with which you have grown up. Not that they are valued because of what they give. If you value a tree because the fruit that it gives you, you value a river for the electricity and the water that it provides you, then you are looking with utilitarian eyes. And that is not a relationship of love. It is a greedy look, begging for oneself. And that is based on self-interest or ego. And where there is self, it is not a relationship of love. And if it's not a relationship of love, it will have all the consequences of a relationship that is egoistic. The ego means you are approaching with desire. And we have examined that in detail as to what happens when you approach life with desire. How it will lead to either fulfillment or frustration. And the cycle of boredom and so on. So he's asking us to go beyond this vicious circle of desire and fulfillment and boredom. Then he says, having a self-image is also self-interest. That is what is hurt when somebody insults you. I mean, he speaks to you rudely or he criticizes you and you feel insulted. He has not hit you. It's not biological pain. It's psychological pain. It arises from within you. So you have to find out how it arises. And when you look at that within yourself, you will discover that you have a self-image which says, I am a very good man, very honest man, and so on, full of praise for first person singular. And when you create that balloon, somebody pricks that balloon and that is what hurts you. So there is a completely different way to approach criticism. To listen to it, to find out whether it is true or false. If it is false, to drop it without rancor. If it is true, to learn from it and to correct yourself. That's a learning mind, not a reacting mind. The egoistic mind is a reacting mind. It says, those who favor me are my friends. Those who criticize me are my enemies. And it creates division. We have gone into that pretty much. So I'll leave it at that. He says the problem of egocentricity is a peculiar problem of human beings because neither trees nor animals have egocentricity. We have evolved from them, but we have this problem of egocentricity. We have, in a previous session, gone into what the ego is, how it arises within us, and so on. How a child is born without the ego, and gradually the ego builds up as he grows up. And we have asked the question whether we are permanently trapped, permanently caught in that ego state, or we can learn to come out of it. So, in order to live completely differently, Krishna says it is necessary to empty the consciousness. Because our consciousness contains right now a conditioning on which it is based. Within that there is patriotism, there is self-interest, there is images, illusions, and so on. And so you need a complete overhaul of this consciousness. Because so long as you live with this consciousness, the egocentric consciousness, the life that we are leading is inevitable. Conflicts, wars, and so on. Because whatever transpires within our consciousness is what is transpiring in society out there. It's just a larger manifestation of the human consciousness. Perception without motive is experiment. If you are observing in order to perceive, but you have the motive to achieve an end, then the inquiry itself becomes self-centered. But when there is no end in view, only a learning process, then it is not an ego process. It is free. from the ego. So that's another subtle part of his teaching, that freedom is at the beginning of learning, it's not the end result of learning. Because without freedom, you don't learn. You are distorting what you perceive from the projections of your own consciousness, your own sense of right and wrong and values and judgments and so on. And therefore you don't see the truths, the actuality. That's why he talks of choiceless awareness. Because then there is no interference from the me. There is no censor, there is no judge, there is nobody saying this is right, that is wrong. I should cultivate this, I should suppress this, and so on. There is no exercise of will. There is only looking with the desire to learn about the mystery of life. Such a learning mind is the religious mind. And that then perception is true action. What we consider action is decision taken by the will. And that doesn't alter anything. It may alter some circumstances, but it doesn't profoundly alter consciousness. What alters consciousness is a deep perception which ends the illusion and therefore the disorder in consciousness. And that perception is real action because it really brings about a change. Not just a change of views or change of opinion or intellectual change, but an actual change in the manner in which you are looking at life and relating with life. That brings me to the third small piece, which is the mediocre mind. And related to what we have just discussed, he says the mediocre mind is a mind that is trapped in a groove of self-interest, living habitually, doing the same thing over and over again, because you found a comfortable niche in which you can live a habitual life. And he says that's a mediocre life, no creativity in it, nothing fresh, nothing new. It's when the mind perceives even the old in a totally new way, because it's dying every day. Then it's approaching life anew, afresh, and it's a creative mind. The other mind, which is mechanical, habitual, is a mediocre mind. The desire for success leads to that kind of mind, habitual mind, which makes money, gives importance to property, to money, to security, which comes from physical security, which comes from money and power and so on. Such a mind which is looking for success is the essence of self-interest, and that is a mediocre mind. So there is this startling statement from Krishnamurti, again, not for us to just accept or repeat, but for us to investigate. He says, success is mediocrity. We think the opposite, no? We think the successful man is the one who has been creative, he has found new ways of earning money and so on. And Krishnaji, why is he saying that man is mediocre? Because who is successful in this sick society? the one who accepted all the arrangements in this society, climbed the ladder to the top, which means he never really questioned anything. And a mind that never really questions anything simply conforms to the circumstances is a mediocre mind. So success is mediocre, which doesn't mean you must not excel, but you don't excel out of self-interest. You excel because that's the right thing to do. Whatever job you're doing, whatever work you're doing, even if that is just cleaning a dish or sweeping your room, to do it well. Not say this is important, I'll give attention to doing it well, and this is not important, I won't do it well. I don't care what happens. That's that judgmental mind with self-interest which says that. So Krishnamurti points out that the religious mind can do all work. It will change the way that work is done. I repeat that. The religious mind can do any work. It will change the way that work is done. So he is giving very deep answers to our problem. It's up to us whether we are interested in touching those depths, or we want to continue with the routine life is good enough. So it depends on each individual. And that's what the teaching is, that you have to be a light unto yourself. Nobody can give you that light, neither any guru nor any organization. There is no shortcut to coming upon wisdom. You yourself have to perceive what is true and what is false by looking at your own consciousness. The entire history of mankind is there in your consciousness. That's the book one has to read and understand. That's what self-knowledge is. And that brings wisdom. And it is wisdom that then changes, transforms consciousness and enables all decisions are taken with the wisdom and not with self-interest. So friends, I'll end it here and pass on to the talk on, is there a meaning to life? And in this chapter, he is basically raising the same question. That if we are simply leading a repetitive life, day after day, living with the same problems, with the same consciousness, with the same condition, then what's the meaning of life? Is there a meaning in that life? And he points out that the scientist Bronowski, who wrote the book that The Ascent of Man, entitled The Ascent of Man, where he said that man ascends through knowledge, he disagrees with him and inquires into that, whether really man ascends through knowledge or knowledge only conditions him and maybe takes him from one groove into a different groove, which may be more interesting, more challenging, more lucrative. But still it's a groove, and therefore doesn't change anything. So knowledge has not changed man. We tend to lead a very mechanical life, whether in one discipline or in another discipline. And what we need is a unity of mankind, which is denied when you live with self-interest. Because that self-interest is seeking personal security and forms groups in which it finds that security. Can be a religious group, can be a national group, and so on. And therefore creates division in the world. And from there comes all the conflict and the wars and the way we are living in society. So it's all connected to each other. Without wisdom, it will always go wrong. There is no structural solution to this problem. You cannot have 7 billion egos on earth and organize them into a peaceful, happy, creative society. Because what each individual is, that's what the society is. Religions have tried to give meaning to life, but all that is ideological, not real. For instance, there is the theory in the East that there is reincarnation, that you are going to come back on this earth with another body. And most people believe in it because it's a very comforting idea that I'm going to come back here. Then it lessens the fear of death because you feel I'll come back. But one doesn't really live according to that belief, because if you really believed in it, you would live rightly, because if you don't live rightly, you will suffer in the next life. That's what the reincarnation says. But we take comfort in the belief of reincarnation. So he is not saying whether reincarnation is a fact or not a fact. He's saying the belief in reincarnation is merely something which is comforting, and therefore man believes in it. And therefore he is not saying it is true or not true. He is saying he has no belief in believing. Believing means what? Either it's true or it is not true, find out. But to believe without knowing whether it is true or not has no great significance. It's still, you believe because of self-interest. Politicians will not answer this because they are obviously leading lives with self-interest and divisive. And they have created wars which are killing people. Right now it's going on in Gaza and all. So he asks, what is it all for? Ultimately for what? To have some more money, to have some more property, and then die? He raises this fundamental question. Is there a meaning to life? And why are we living the way we are living? Does this kind of life have any meaning? So when you understand yourself, you understand human consciousness. It's not a personal understanding. It's not just your consciousness. Your consciousness is the consciousness of mankind. And so but what you can observe is not the consciousness of somebody else. What you can observe is your own consciousness. But when you deeply observe and learn about your own consciousness, you have learned about all mankind because we share the same consciousness. It's just the conditioning since birth, which is different from one man to another. But every human being has desire, Every human being has fear. Every human being goes through sorrow. So all our problems are the same. The process of division is the same. Therefore, we share the same consciousness. The details may be different. What I desire may be different from what you desire. But desire is the common factor. So this is when you deeply understand your own consciousness, you have understood mankind, humanity, human consciousness. Then he points out that psychologically, the future is now. That there has been no psychological evolution with time. There has been biological evolution, but there has been no psychological evolution. We were fighting with bows and arrows 3,000 years ago, and we are still fighting 3,000 years later, now with drones and nuclear bombs and all kinds of weapons provided by scientific progress. So one also begins to question whether this so-called progress is real progress at all. So there are many major questions about our life. And since the future is now, because if you don't transform, then next year you will have the same problems which you are having today. Nothing changes. You may be desiring one thing today and you may be desiring another next year, but desire is the common factor. You are approaching life with desire. And if you are doing that and you don't transform that, then 20 years later you will still be acting out of desire. So a total transformation of consciousness is necessary. And then he goes into this question of meditation. He says, part meditation is understanding oneself, this whole inquiry of choiceless observation of oneself with a view to understand is part of meditation, is a part of meditation. But ultimately, meditation is when the meditator is absent. When your mind becomes silent, when you are not present. Meditation takes place in consciousness. And that is real meditation. Not the meditation done willfully by a meditator. That's not true meditation. So he gives to meditation a very much deeper meaning than what most religions and most gurus have given, who have provided techniques of meditation. Not that you must not practice those techniques. A technique will achieve a certain end, but that end is not freedom. Like yoga will make your body supple, but yoga won't make you free. So it's not a problem. It is not a question that you must not do a technique, but if you are doing it egoistically, the ego is sustained. If you are doing it with a mind which is wanting to learn what that technique does, then it's a learning mind, it's a religious mind. So ultimately, the motive with which you are engaging in that activity matters more than whether you engage in that activity or don't. Then he takes up another question that we think that a lot of experience is necessary in order to come upon wisdom. And we also want transcendental experience, religious experience of visions and so on, which one has read about. But he points out that experience does not bring freedom. Unless from that experience you learn what is true and what is false. Merely accumulating information, Experience is like accumulating knowledge, and that does not transform consciousness. So ultimately, it is perception of what is true and what is false that brings about real transformation of consciousness. That is what self-knowledge is. And when you are able to do it with full awareness and full attention, then there is no motive, there is no interference of thought. So that's another thing he has pointed out. We need to experiment with that when all your senses are alive and heightened, and you give your attention with all your senses, then there is no center, there is no ego, there is no me paying attention. And that's a free state, that's the religious state, ultimate state, and that is the state of freedom. And that in that freedom, truth is perceived. Otherwise, one's own observation is distorted by one's own content of one's own consciousness. So that's why you have to free yourself of the content of consciousness. Freedom doesn't mean that you have to eliminate the content. Freedom means that that content does not dominate in your consciousness. It's like having a screwdriver. You use it when you have to open a screw. Rest of the time it lies in your cupboard. But our thoughts are not like that. We are not able to shut them off. You can use thought and thinking when it's useful, and then when it's not useful, switch it off. That's the state he's talking of. But when the thought governs you, you are a slave to your thoughts, to your conditioning. Then you can't do it. So you require freedom from conditioning, which is also freedom from reaction, freedom from domination of thought in your consciousness. All this requires a skeptical, inquiring, observant mind, which is the learning mind. And that is the learning to be done. And this learning cannot be had from either a book or a teacher. So I would conclude with the statement that only the trivial can be taught. The profound has to be learned for oneself. With that, I end this talk. And as I said at the beginning, in the next session, I will try to summarize whatever we have learned so far from this book and my understanding. Thank you.
Shall we have a 5-minute break?
Yes, sure. Okay.
Oops. There we go. Okay, you need to unmute again. Professor Krishna, can you unmute? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I can. I got.
Okay, so thank you everyone for typing questions. So let's start our Q&A section for today's call. The first question is from Sanjay. Sir, there are two sets of people, one who confirms and the other who reacts. Is there any such mind in between, not to confirm and not to react?
Yes, that is the mind Krishnaji is pointing to, which neither conforms nor reacts, because the reaction is an ego process and the conformity is also an ego process. You have to go beyond these two. So you have to negate both these. The conformity is as wrong or as illusory as the reaction. Now, for example, we have had revolutions. They are based on reaction. There's one emperor or king and he's wicked, and so a group of people kills him and assumes power. But that has not changed anything, because these people who are in power, they also get corrupted. And so the new king or the new government is also corrupt. So that kind of revolution reaction doesn't change anything. A violent reaction doesn't change anything. At the same time, conforming also doesn't change anything, because then you're silently contributing to continuing the same way as you have done till now. That may be comfortable because you are accepted in society, but it doesn't change anything. So the only way you can change is neither to react nor to conform, which is inwardly not to accept and not to reject, but examine what it is, drop what is false, and retain what is true. And if it is with regard to yourself, change that. If one can respond to what one is hearing from another in that way, then you are neither conforming nor reacting, but you are understanding, you are growing in your understanding.
Thank you, Professor. We have a question from Bhavesh now. The conflict between who I am and who I want to become is very strong. I am mostly caught in that conflict, and my emotions are therefore violent. In that state, how does one observe choicelessly?
You can't, but you can realize that that kind of reaction It's not bringing about change and only complicating the relationship and life further. So you know that it is false. It's not the solution to your problem. And therefore, can you drop it? That is the important, that's what it means to negate the false. You have seen that it is false, now you have to negate the false. Nobody else can negate it for you. You only can negate it because you have seen that it doesn't bring about any change. It doesn't bring about any learning. It only makes more complication because it makes you angry and violent and so on. You yourself are observing that. So why don't you just drop that?
Next, we have a question from Chandra. Is finding purpose in life, meaning in life, not an egocentric process? How is this different from seeking success or climbing up the ladder?
Because one is only asking a question, one is not attributing a meaning. One is only asking the question, what is the meaning? And in that inquiry, finding that this kind of habitual routine life has very little meaning, the question is, can you negate that? It's false, and therefore, can you negate that in order to discover what may be truly meaningful? You don't know what the meaning is. If you attribute meaning, it is from your imagination. You can. Religions have done it, and in various ways you can contribute, accept imaginary meanings and feel good about it. But that's not the truth. So to come upon the truth, you have to negate the false. It's not enough to see the false as the false. Having seen the false as the false, you have to negate it. So that you have to be passionate about this. It's not simply an intellectual change of opinion that, yes, earlier I thought it is true, now I think it is not true. Both are at the level of only the intellect. You're going from one opinion to another opinion. Opinion is not truth. Truth lies at the level of perception. And for that you have to, your observation, your attention must go much deeper. It is superficial to agree, and it's also superficial not to agree or to reject. It is important not to be caught in this superficial game of I agree or I don't agree. Unfortunately, through our schooling and college and university and so on, that's the response that we have been encouraged to have. When something is said, they ask, do you agree or not agree? And in a way, it's a very superficial question. It doesn't matter whether you agree or you don't agree. It's like voting. You can't vote and decide on what the truth is. It's just because large number of people vote for something, it doesn't become true. It may be a shared illusion. All of us share in that illusion, and that doesn't mean that is the truth. So you can't arrive at it through this democratic process of voting, what the truth is. It's a much deeper inquiry. That's why it requires a lot of self-knowledge, a lot of observing without the observer, paying a lot of attention, and staying with that question for a long time before you come upon the truth. If you simply accept an opinion the question ends before you reach the truth. So this inquiry is a much deeper inquiry than the academic inquiry into what is true and what is false. That's like philosophy, what philosophy has become. Philosophy is the intellectual quest for truth. It was not meant to be that way. It was meant to be the quest for wisdom. Sophie is wisdom. So, but it has been reduced to intellectually agreeing to the logic of something. Truth is not just a logical conclusion. There is a interesting conversation that comes to my mind. Somebody asked Krishnamurti, "Sir, if I make the statement that the observer is the observed, will it not be true?" Because that's what Krishnamurti says. And Krishnamurti's reply was, "It will be true, but there will be no truth in it." That means you have not rediscovered that, and then you are speaking from it. You're merely repeating what I have said. It's not false, but it's not the truth. There is another statement of his which corroborates with this. He says, "The repetition of a truth is a lie."
Thank you, Professor. We have a question now from Shamal. In the chapter on relationship, Kay speaks of the importance of a reality that is beyond death, love, and pleasure. Unless one comes upon this reality, however a good relationship may be, it remains superficial, casual, or yielding and resisting. Without the sense of beauty of the real, relationship becomes inevitably a narrowing process. What is the reality that Kay is pointing to?
I'll go into this in greater detail next week when I summarize what we have learned over the last 7 sessions. But essentially, what it means, what he is saying is, when you engage in an activity, because you perceive the beauty of it, and that energizes you, it's different from when you engage in it with the motive of having a reward or a result which you desire. The first is a joy. The second is an achievement, the pleasure of achievement. And he says that joy is liberating, but achievement or pleasure is binding, enslaving. So it's very subtle. And unless one really understands that through one's own observation, one can repeat intellectually all this, it'll have very little significance.
Next, we have a question from Chetna. JK says there is no time. Whatever is is present only. When one job is running, at the same time another one is forgotten. And when that other job is remembered, I feel that I am caught in a mind-time gap. Would you please elaborate?
He is talking in the field of the psyche. So you have to consider his statement as a psychological statement. He's saying there is no such thing as psychological time. In other words, time does not help you to come upon transformation or to come upon perception. You can get more experience with time. You can get more knowledge with time. But experience and knowledge, as we saw in the talk today, if you are attached to it, they block the inquiry. They remove the question before you reach perception. So the important question is, how does one come upon perception? Because the knowledge of the truth is very easy. You can read Krishnamurti's book, or you can read the Buddha, or you can read Jesus Christ, and you know what truths they are talking of. This knowing the truth is superficial. Discovering, rediscovering that truth for oneself, only that is meaningful. And that means the truth lies at the level of perception. Perception is a sensory phenomenon. All your senses are involved in it, not just the intellect. The intellect is just one of the senses that we have. So it requires a certain passionate engagement with all your senses alive to discover holistically what the truth is. I mean, every university has professors of comparative religion, but they don't come upon transformation of consciousness. They know what the Buddha taught, what Jesus Christ taught, what Socrates taught. They will give you a talk, several talks based on each teacher. But his own consciousness is not transformed. It's neither the Buddha consciousness, nor the Christ consciousness, nor the Socratic consciousness. So knowledge doesn't take you there. The intellect is a superficial response in the field of truth, in the quest for truth. It's useful in refining the question, but it can't answer the question because the thinking comes from the known and the truth is the unknown. That's why it is a pathless quest. There is a joke that one student in Brockwood was talking to another student in Brockwood, which is the Krishnamurti school in England. And he asked, if it's a pathless land, how do you get there? The other student says, get lost. It's both a joke and it is meaningful.
Professor, we have a question now from Chandra. Last week, we talked about Just be the witness of mind on everything happening around you as awareness. But according to K, the moment you are aware that I am aware, one is not aware. May we have your thoughts, please?
This is rather subtle. You see, we are used to coming to a conclusion in any inquiry. And that conclusion is then stored in memory as a result. And next time you don't inquire because you have this result, you have already inquired. So you don't approach things afresh, which means you cannot be creative. You are acting mechanically from the knowledge derived from experience in the past. That's the process we have been educated into. And what Krishnamurti is talking is something completely different from that. He's saying, eliminate the past, die to the past, forget the past, don't use it to interpret and don't add to it. Even if you perceive the truth today, don't store it in memory, because what is stored in memory from today's inquiry blocks you from inquiring tomorrow. So knowledge becomes a barrier if one is attached to the knowledge. If you leave it as a fact, like the furniture in your room, it's not blocking you, but it exists there. But these conclusions, they add to the conditioning, and that conditioning dominates your judgments and your reactions and so on. So that is the problem. To be free from that is to realize that there is no value in this condition. It's really blocking me. Although I call it the me, but it's blocking the me from understanding or perceiving beyond the known. The really great sages, the teachers around whom various religions were built, like Jesus Christ and Buddha and Lao Tzu and so on. How did they come upon the truth? They didn't have a system. Christ didn't have Christianity to teach him. He was brought up as a Jew. How did he come upon the Sermon on the Mount? So it requires freedom from the known. And that is why Krishna is saying, don't rely on the known and don't build on the known. Whether you build through your own experience or you build through reading or other people's experience, it's the same. That content, you have to die to that content and not use that. Otherwise, you are coloring the fresh insight in terms of the already known. So it's a very subtle process. The known exists, but can you discover that the known is not useful for interpreting what you are seeing? So freedom from the known is non-interference of the known. If you have noticed, Krishnaji was asked the same question year after year. Each time you find that he is approaching it afresh and giving the answer in a different way. The academic doesn't do it. The academic gives you the same answer because he is giving it from your knowledge, from his knowledge. That's mechanical. But he is approaching it afresh. He's looking at it afresh, and he is saying what he is seeing now, which is a fresh approach. Somebody pointed out to him and said, "Sir, you are not consistent." And he said, only machines are consistent. The mechanical is consistent. But when you approach things freshly. What you think and see today may be different from what you saw yesterday. That's why it's a wholly different way of living. There is a book by that title, A Wholly Different Way of Living. I think it's there based on dialogues with Professor Anderson. That book is called A Wholly Different Way of Living. So to learn a wholly different way of living, you need a transformation of consciousness. You need to look at things very differently from the way we have been trained to look at. That's both the difficulty and the charm of Krishnamurti.
So maybe I'm thinking it would be a good time to pause our discussion at this time. And we will answer a couple additional questions that have been posted through email. I would like to turn it over to Donna, and also to you, Professor Krishna, if you would like to say anything else.
Yeah, just what I had said in the beginning. I want to repeat it because I noticed that many new people have joined. That next week, I'll be not talking from the book, but I'll be summarizing what we have learned in the last 7 sessions. That is going to be our last session. And allowing a lot more time for questions, and you can ask questions based on any of the sessions or on new thoughts that have come to you. You can ask any question you wish in that session. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.